We really do hope that this bloodshed ends at the earliest, because irrespective of which side the casualties are on, innocent lives are being lost, and there really needs to be an end to that. But Major Libby Weiss, thank you so much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Israel, of course, is going to be doubling down as far as its counteroffensive is concerned. But Palestine believes that Israel has always been the oppressor and will always remain to be. This is not a terror strike, is what they say. This is resistance. So let me open this up to Azzam Tamimi, who's a British-Palestinian Jordanian academician. He joins us on this broadcast. So thank you so much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Let me begin by asking you, the oppressor-victim narrative, who's the oppressor, who's the victim, that really differs based on who you talk to. But do you agree with the assault that we saw on Saturday and what, of course, followed after that? Do you believe this is the way forward as far as the issue between Israel and Palestine is concerned?
Well, if you imprison people for 17 years and you control their lives, controlling when they can have electricity and when they cannot, when they can have water and when they cannot, when they can have milk for their children and when they cannot, eventually they explode. This is a spontaneous reaction to oppression.
Sure, you say this is a spontaneous reaction to oppression, but let me quote from what the Hamas Charter says. The 1988 Charter says that Israel will exist and continue to exist only until Islam will obliterate it. Do you think this is the sentiment that all Palestinians harbor? And if not, then do you think attacks like these are only counterproductive to that bigger cause?
Yeah, why do we have a conflict? The problem is that people don't have time to try and understand why we have a conflict. We have a conflict because one day my mother was driven out of her house, my father was driven out of his land, and these Jewish immigrants came from Europe to escape persecution by the European Christians, took our land and took our homes and created a state for themselves and left us in the refugee camps. This is how the conflict started.
And the conflict started decades ago. It's been going on for decades now. So what do you think is the way forward then? Is there a solution that you see in the near future? Is there? And if it is, then what is that solution?
The Palestinians have tried so many times with the Israelis, and Yasser Arafat went into a deal with them in Oslo in the hope that they would allow him to have a Palestinian state. Eventually, they were only interested in turning the PLO into a Palestinian authority that becomes a security agency for the Zionist occupation. Occupation never ended. The West Bank is still under occupation. Gaza is still under siege. And therefore, the Palestinians have been left with no other means to regain their independence and freedom.
Sure, but is conflict the answer? Is conflict the way forward? And I keep coming back to that because we've seen this begin Saturday early morning. It's been 4 days and there's absolutely no let-up in the war. In fact, it's only going to escalate now because Israel and the Israeli Prime Minister have come out and said that we are going to put an end to this war. How do you think this is going to fare for the innocent civilians caught in the crossfire on both sides?
Well, you see, for the Palestinians rotting in refugee camps for 57 years, or for really 75 years now for some of them, is not a life. Is not a life worth adhering to. Well, it is regrettable that there is so much bloodshed, but this bloodshed is caused by the continuation of occupation. Therefore, to answer your question, the solution to this problem begins with ending the occupation. The Israelis now have a government which is so right-wing, which mixes secular Zionism with religious Judaism in order to come up with a very combustive cocktail. They don't want to give the Palestinians any right. They don't recognize them. They continue to dispossess them. They continue to build settlements or expand existing ones. And now they want to take our mosque even, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. Every week there are attempts to enter into the mosque, to desecrate it. Some of them hope to bring it down and establish their own temple. The problem is that these guys came from Europe at a time when they were persecuted there, and now they believe they can remain there permanently, take our land, take our mosques, and just forget about us, because they have all the support they need from the United States of America and from its Western allies. You put yourself in the shoes of the Palestinians. What can they do? Continue to live in humiliation? Continue to live without dignity? Continue to live without prospects for your children? Or resist? The Vietnamese people resisted before us and they won. The Algerian people resisted before us and they won. The people of South Africa resisted until they brought an end to apartheid. And this Israeli government combines colonialism with apartheid altogether. You can see now what the Palestinians are facing.
Sure, you call it resistance, sir, but this is what is being tagged as terror. It's a terror act. Innocents were harmed, innocents were targeted by Hamas on Saturday morning, which triggered this recent conflict. How do you respond to that?
Of course, your enemy would try to discredit you in whatever ways they can. There was a time, and I was a student at the time in the United Kingdom, when Margaret Thatcher called Nelson Mandela a terrorist, and she vowed that Nelson Mandela would never set foot on British soil. An enemy can call their opponents whatever they like. What really matters to us is that we, the Palestinians, are the victims. The British enabled the Zionist movement to establish a homeland on our land, in our homes. This is a fact of history that cannot be changed.
Sure, but do you think, coming back to what I was asking you earlier, that does the Hamas represent all of the Palestinian cause? And if not, then isn't this counterproductive? Also then, don't you think that Hamas, and by extension Palestine, as many in the world view it, is becoming a pawn in the hands of countries like Iran, who perhaps are just furthering their own agenda?
Well, Iran has nothing really to do with this. Probably Iran has its own agenda. Israel, some other parties have their own agendas. What really matters for the Palestinians is that they want to be recognized as the victims in this conflict. And this can be done peacefully. As I explained in my book about Hamas, the best way to do this is to start with a long-term truce. Okay, let's stop the bloodshed and let's disengage, and let's negotiate truly with honesty, ending the occupation as a starting point. Then probably in 20 years' time or 30 years' time, when we have peace for that period of time, my grandchildren and the grandchildren of the settlers who are living in my father's land and in my mother's house may decide to coexist together peacefully. Who knows? Let's put an end to the bloodshed. The Israelis have never accepted this. And I've challenged many Israeli politicians. I met so many of them in past years and told them this is the way forward. Recognize Hamas as a representative, at least part of the Palestinians, because it was elected democratically in 2006. Negotiate with Hamas, and Hamas is willing to agree to a long-term truce. Now, once we have that long-term truce, let the next generations decide what they want to do with their lives.
Sure, what the solution is not for me to say, but one thing we can all agree on is that there needs to be an end to the bloodshed. And that end needs to happen sooner than later, because this has gone on for decades, and unfortunately the unarmed innocent civilians are the ones that are losing their lives, that are caught in the crossfire of this dispute that continues. But I thank you, Azzam Tamimi, for joining us here on this broadcast on CNN News 18 with your perspective.